Promote a culture of inclusion, supercharge your communication, and unleash the full potential of your teams and leaders with the Inclusive Handbook collection from the Diversity Movement. As part of the collection, I wrote the Inclusive Leadership Handbook with Kurt Merriweather to empower leaders with tools needed to cultivate a culture that fosters creativity, innovation, and employee engagement. Through strategies, exercises, and self-reflection, leaders at all levels can enhance their effectiveness. Learn more at thediversitymovement.com/store. Use code HOL at checkout for 25% of your first order. Do you want to build your brand by being a guest on industry-leading podcasts? If you're a business leader, an author, or a speaker, my guess is that you do. Picture this. You, a dynamic executive easily connecting with engaged audiences, turbocharging your top-of-funnel marketing, and creating a treasure trove of content with every episode. Podcasting is a game changer that you've been waiting for. And podcastally.com is your VIP ticket to podcast PR success. Say goodbye to the ordinary and hello to the extraordinary exposure. Let the Podcast Ally team connect you with the best-in-class podcast for you to be a guest on. Head over to podcastally.com and use the promo code DT for a 10% discount on Podcast Ally services. That's podcastally.com, promo code DT. Welcome to High Octane Leadership with Donald Thompson. This season, we're diving deeper with more solo episodes, where I'll share the experiences that have led to recognition by EY, Forbes, Fast Company, and others. Not as a boast, but as milestones on my entrepreneurial path. From growing multi-million-dollar firms to successful business exits and building high-performance teams with a global perspective. I'll reveal the insights and strategies from my journey and share them with you so that we can win together. Alongside these solo episodes, we'll have industry visionaries and thought leaders, and we'll explore effective leadership. Ready to empower your leadership journey with real success stories? Let's embark on this transformational journey together. I'm joined today by Kurt Merriweather, a distinguished product strategist and marketing expert. As a certified diversity executive, Kurt passionately integrates DEI with technology to build high-performance teams. After 20 years working with global brands like Discovery and AOL, he's leveraged his unique blend of creative thinking and data analysis to co-found the Diversity Movement. Thank you for coming on. Glad to spend some time with you today, Kurt.
Don, thanks for having me today. One of the things that we see when we're going from 0 to 1 is that it's a challenge to identify the opportunity in the marketplace to launch. So how did you identify and validate the market need for your venture and your product?
One, Kurt, thanks for the question. When you think about embarking on the journey from 0 to $1 million in revenue, it's one of the most critical phases in the life of a business, right? It really validates whether or not you have a hobby, a side hustle, or an actual sustainable opportunity to grow a business and a firm. And when you're launching a startup or you're stepping into a new sales role, you're introducing a new product, that $1 million milestone is that first significant validation that you're on the right track. And so when I think about whether it's the Diversity Movement, our latest venture, whether it is that 0 to $1 million at Walk Rest, a boutique marketing firm that I'm the board chair, or the countless startups that I work with, most people underestimate the difficulty of getting that first million. And one of the things before I get into the product, I want to get into just share the mindset of how to think about your new venture, right? And that 0 to $1 million is both a milestone and it's a test. Right? Because it's an opportunity for you to determine what works and what doesn't real time. And that is your product, that's your people, that's your positioning, and that's your ability to be profitable. And all of these things you start to figure out with real-time client interactions, right? When you're building your business from 0 to $1 million. And so that strategic research that you're doing, that ability to learn from early clients, that ability to pivot. And we talk about pivot and just say the term, but quite frankly, you have a business thesis that is likely going to be wrong in pretty significant areas. And you have to, as an entrepreneur, as a business leader, as somebody that's launching a new product into the enterprise, have to understand and be okay with that. When you're a little bit naive and you think that what you're doing and the way that you're doing it is going to work, now all of a sudden you've constrained yourself from looking at new ways to get to that $1 million, because you become focused on your initial thesis being correct versus your initial thesis being directionally correct and giving you the opportunity to pivot and grow. And so when you're thinking about kind of that initial product, that initial presentation in the market, there's two schools of thought, right? There's a Steve Jobs school of thought that I'm the visionary and I'm going to tell people what they need before they know they need it.
Right.
All right, cool, right? But most people don't have that kind of time, backing, intuition, skill set. Like, if we're really honest, most of us, and I'm in this group, have to listen to people who can buy what we're selling, right? We have to create an environment where we are testing our messaging, testing our marketing, our sales process, and ultimately our product and service with clients that are willing to take a chance on us as we go on that endeavor. So those are a couple of initial thoughts to kind of set the stage for the discussion. But that 0 to 1 million is really, really critical.
Right. So as you're thinking about going from 0 to 1 million, and you're thinking about the initial engagements that you need to get. And so it's one thing to have one customer, but how do you move to 10? And so when you think about the first 10 client engagements that you get, what are the key learnings that you're looking for in those first 10 engagements to guide your process going forward? And how do you think about that in the context of the overall growth strategy?
So for me, when I look at businesses, and this is really independent of the type of business, quite frankly, I want the 10 clients that have a relationship with me strong enough that I'm going to have a very powerful feedback loop. I'm actually, in the first 10, not concerned about understanding completely pricing, right? Doesn't mean I want to give the product away, because people will do all sorts of stuff for free, right? People have to pay enough to make a decision that your product is worth testing. Your product can potentially solve a pain that they have or take advantage of an opportunity they have. But I'm happy to discount. I'm happy to let people know there's an early adopter marketing program, because it is some dollars, but the most important thing is, of the 10, do you have 3 to 4 different use cases within those 10 early adopter clients? So for us at the Diversity Movement, when we were starting out with our initial learning product, Diversity Beyond the Checkbox, the digital learning tool, we talked to over 50 different clients in our beta testing period to get feedback and guidance and wisdom, and yes, do some light business development. And within those 50 that tested us, we ended up with 10 that wanted to be customers of the Diversity Movement at some level right away. But those first 10 customers were a couple of startups, a couple of folks in the services business, a couple of folks in the SaaS business, one that was an enterprise level customer. So now all of a sudden we ended up with 3 to 4 different use cases to now validate our go-to-market strategy. So even though we were early, we ended up with a lot of learning knowledge because the use cases were all different. So I don't think it's smart to have 10 customers that look and feel the same, 10 customers, the same level of revenue, number of employees, level of complexity, because I don't think you learn enough fast enough, right? Within those first 10, you're kind of cutting corners a little bit. I think you want a diverse group of initial 10 customers so you learn a lot fast. And that's one of the advantages that I think in terms of getting those 10. The other thing that happens when you get that first 10 customers is you know that if you execute, you have the opportunity to build a business. Because if you can get one customer, you can be super lucky. If you can get 2 to 3 customers, you can be a great person with a good network. To get 10 clients in a short period of time means that your message is addressing a pain point that is prevalent in the market. So you get rewarded for getting that part right. And then those 10 customers become your petri dish. right? Your live educational environment, if you will, in terms of growing and fostering long-term growth.
And as you're doing that initial work to get the 10 clients and to get the pilots and the beta process, often you're in a market where there's not a playbook. How do you cultivate a growth mindset and continue to educate yourself about what's happening in terms of challenging yourself to scale the business, because you're doing things that other people haven't done before? And so there's no roadmap, there's no playbook. So there's this concept of self-mentorship. Talk about specific instances where you've been able to use self-mentorship to propel your growth and your learning as you move forward in the business.
So I like to think about it, and again, I appreciate the question, not so much as self-mentorship, but more as a researcher or an analyst. And the reason that I make that distinction is that means that I'm listening to my team members that I'm working with. I'm listening to potential investors that we're talking to. And I'm also very deeply listening to our clients in terms of how our product or service is solving the problem real time. So for example, with the diversity movement, we launched a product called Micro Videos by the Diversity Movement, where we have over 600 video vignettes around DEI and organizational change topics. So we introduced this product into our early adopter clients, and they loved the videos, right? They wanted to be in the top 10 client base. But through the learning, we found that after the initial push and promotion, the amount of usage of the product dropped off pretty significantly. And so what we learned is no matter how good the videos were, no matter how powerful the topic was, no matter what was going on, life, business, work is still a significant distraction to adopting anything new. And so we had to learn very clearly that we had to continue to re-educate, reinforce the value of spending time in the video platform. We looked at comparables in the marketplace like Netflix, like Hulu, like Amazon Prime, and realized that they linked the success of people using their entire portfolio by promoting the next cool show. And so we then started to use our email marketing technology, our newsletter mindset, our webinar mindset to go into organizations and have a repetitive message of why the new information and knowledge was going to help them with their job today. And so we learned that it was going to take ongoing education in order for the product, even though it was good, even though it was powerful, to cement itself into somebody's new workflow. And so that's an example of taking a technology, finding 10 clients, but then specific learning that we gained from that process that then has propelled us forward and set us up for larger success. And so what we've done ultimately is now we've taken that product idea, and as a part of new rollouts, we have an internal marketing and educational plan. As a part of new opportunities, we have taken the 600 videos and put them together in playlists like Spotify. So that learning came in the first 10 so that we could be more successful in the first 100. And so that's a specific example of how we've applied that knowledge in what we're doing day to day and then continue to help us grow.
Right. So that what you were talking about at the very beginning, this idea of you had an idea about how we're going to proceed, and it's different because you were able to leverage the thinking and the experiences that you had with the first 10 clients and then see that in action. And so then you're thinking about new things in ways that you wouldn't have before.
That's right.
And one of the things that we talk about a lot is the idea of looking at a problem and looking all around the problem to figure out how to best proceed. And so one of the things that you've introduced to your teams is this idea of 6 thinking hats that Edward de Bono wrote. And so how do you use that concept and that framework as you're thinking around a problem? And how do you apply that to decision-making, innovation, other things that you think are important as a leader in your businesses?
So one of the things, Kurt, and thank you for that, is that We want to run an organization to where we create space that the best idea wins. And that best idea can come from an intern, that can come from somebody in operations, that can come from somebody on our product team, on our sales team, on our client success team. But we want people to push their ideas forward so that we have the opportunity to learn from one another and win in the marketplace, right? So that's number one. Now, it's easy to say, more difficult to execute because number one, people are busy. Number two, everybody doesn't express their ideas in the same way, right? The same timing, the same environment. And so 20 plus years ago, Grant Willard, my mentor, good friend, introduced me to the book called The Six Thinking Hats. And I'll go through them really, really quickly. They're not complicated, but they allow you to think through situations, opportunities, product opportunities quickly, and allows you to have a mental model by thinking this way. Yellow hat. These are all the things that can go good. These are the upside, the revenue you're chasing, right? White hat, just the facts, the data, right? You have your black hat, which is your risk, your opportunities that you need to think about differently because what's the downside, right? You have your red hat, which is how you feel, because guess what? We're all driven by emotion. And so if you don't add that into your discourse with your team, you're being naive, right? The other part of the red hat is not just emotion, but your intuition. The things that you may feel about a situation that you can't fully articulate. You then have your blue hat, right, which is your project management, your operation, right? Then you also have your green hat, which is your kind of what's new, your creative thinking, right, as you pull through the process. And so when you think about the different hats, right, you think about your yellow hat, you think about your good stuff. Think about black hat, your risk assessment, the things that you're going to need to overcome to be resilient. The white hat, which is the facts, right? You think about the red hat, which is the feeling. Then you think about the blue hat, which is your operation. And then the green hat, your blue sky thinking, if you will, or green hat is your next level thinking. What's next? What could be? Possibility thinking. Now, all of a sudden, no matter what level you are in the business, and you're in a meeting and your team adopts this framework, you can gently raise your hand and simply say, can I offer some white hat data that may be valuable to this discussion? The room understands that you're talking about facts. You also can think about folks that you know that always start with a yellow hat, always start with the red hat, always start with that dominant hat of who they are. But that doesn't mean they don't have a lot to contribute to the entire conversation. So if you use the six thinking hats, you can take that person that is always fact-based and say, yeah, but what does your gut say? How do you feel? And you can transition to give everybody in your organization, everybody in that meeting, the opportunity to communicate better with more clarity and less concern about the hierarchy because you're using this framework to give yourself an opportunity to create an environment where the best idea wins. And so I'm a big fan of this framework, use it all the time. And it's one of the cheat codes that allows me to facilitate meetings even when I'm not in charge.
That's powerful, this idea of shifting perspective and using hats as a way to do that so that people are literally thinking differently without necessarily calling somebody out or making somebody feel uncomfortable when you're trying to navigate and go through a conversation. And that's an important piece, whether you're dealing internally or even externally when you're having conversations with other people, building this idea of building credibility because you're letting everybody have their voice be heard and be seen in the moment. And one of the challenges with starting a company or chasing an idea is that when you start, sometimes you just don't have much credibility. And how do you address that when you're trying to make your first sale and you don't have any customers?
Yeah. No customers, no credibility, just an idea.
Right.
Yeah. Been there, done that. I have some thoughts.
Yeah, I thought you might. So you talked about cheat codes, but how do you do that when you walk in the room and you have no customers, no credibility, no revenue, and maybe sometimes not even a product? So how do you start to develop credibility and build trust with early customers?
So one of the things that I recommend to folks, And I was talking with a friend of mine. This was many years ago, but it stuck with me. His name's Chris Hively. And he is a serial entrepreneur, did extremely well in business. And I sat down for a cup of coffee and asked him, what would he share with entrepreneurs and business leaders if they really had an open mind? He said, you need to talk to 100 people before you write a single line of code. He said, most people start building a product before they have true customer intimacy with the market they're trying to go after. But if you talk to 100 people in the space, you're going to find, number one, your voice in terms of how to communicate your value proposition of your idea, your concept, your product. Number two, you're going to get a bunch of questions you can't answer, which is going to force you back into the lab to get those answers. The third thing you're going to find is you're going to find some early adopters that like your concept and want to partner with you to make it real. And then you're going to figure out the characteristics of people that are never going to buy from you.
right. Tire kickers. They're just going to keep
straight tire kickers, man. And so whether it's talking to 100 people or 25 or 50, I don't know what that right number is. But the thought process, right, that Chris taught me that day is make sure that you understand the appetite in the market at that time for what you're pitching before you over-invest in a product that might not be right for that moment. So that's number one. Now, back to your question of how do you develop credibility? Once you do that research, now you can go into a client, large business, small business, and say, based on our research of over 100 different companies, we found that 35% of those companies were very excited about the time they would save by implementing XYZ. You can use your research as credibility. You already are talking to people that know you're a new business, a new venture. So what they want to know is that you're thoughtful and that you're serious about making good decisions at scale through the process. And a lot of times when you're talking to customers, you will have already talked to 5 to 7 folks in your research group that are in the similar business. And now you can understand the problem set, the scenarios that are going to move that business leader by industry. And now you have a thought partner. You have a growth partner with how to proceed with what you're doing. And I'm very excited about sharing this because I've done it a number of times. People that are leaders in business understand how to evaluate technology, how to evaluate new service offerings, how to evaluate new entrepreneurs or companies to work with. They're just trying to figure out if you're going to be one of the winners that they're going to bet on. They're not scared that what you're doing is new. It's got to be new before it can be robust and solid, right? Most enterprise companies have sandboxes to try new things. But what they're not going to do is bet on somebody that's winging it, that hasn't done their homework, that doesn't know their pain points, and doesn't know how their business can solve the pain points of them as a client. And so for me, Kurt, what I've seen and what I try to coach business leaders to do is do your homework. And that homework is real live conversations with people who are in your buying personas. And that's going to give you insight and credibility with what you need to continue to grow.
That's a powerful way to think about it as you're going to market with what feels like not very many weapons, if so to speak. But the research that you do becomes valuable. And that's one of the things that you can do even in the first conversation is deliver value in that discussion. And so as you're having some of those conversations with early customers, sometimes we have surface level interactions with folks. So we see a list in our customer relationship management system and they bought from us and then we might move on from that because we see the revenue. But there are often deeper reasons that people invest in a solution or an offering. And so how do you tease those things out when you're talking to customers, going beyond those surface level reasons where you may have collected the money, but you don't have the understanding? So how do you think about getting those insights in the conversations that you have, and talk a little bit about how you've done that, both from wearing a sales hat and a marketing hat, in terms of how you get those deeper insights?
I'll look at that from the marketing hat first as you're trying to do customer discovery. And most folks that are listening to this understand what customer discovery is as a concept, right? But in practice, right, we have to be open-minded about what we hear. See, a lot of times what we do is we're good at collecting information, but we're not as good at interpreting data. And that's really, really important. And most people are excited about the business information collection business. I'm excited about the data interpretation business because through interpreting the data and insights, whether that is for a new product, whether that is the employee sentiment, right, of how they're feeling at work, digging into the data is not just whether or not somebody feels belonging at work, but why. And one of the things that we found, for example, in our research on that is someone's belonging at work, their scores of the health of the organization, their ability to see themselves growing in the organization is significantly impacted by their direct manager. It's not the global brand of the business. It is not the outstanding wellness programs that the company has. It is the direct interaction with their supervisor and the team that they're a part of. And so by looking at the data through hundreds of clients that we've worked with, hundreds of assessments that we've done, we've been able to tease out what are some of the elements to allow people leaders to be more inclusive, right? And that's about the data interpretation, not just the data collection. When we shift back from a marketing standpoint, external marketing about your product, most people want to defend what they've built. And that's a big challenge in being a competitive learner in the technology product space, right? As a business owner and a business leader, you actually have to suspend your point of view until you fully understand the point of view of your client or your customer. And then you can add your point of view to the mix. But if you drive forward first with your point of view, you're typically going to miss what your client is trying to say to you, right? For example, a lot of times when you talk about pricing, whether it's for a hourly rate, if you're in the services business, if you are in the SaaS business, what is the monthly subscription cost, right? But pricing is a very important element of how you're going to scale and grow your business, right? Because if you can't price it affordably, right, how do you scale? How do you grow? How do you create profit? Well, a lot of times, right, the client wants to pay less. You automatically think, wait a minute, you don't think my product is valuable. Depends. Is the client that says the pricing's too high because they have 10,000 users? That's not a bad thing, right? If the pricing's too high per user and somebody wants to buy 5 units of your product, well, okay. But a lot of times pricing has to do with scale. Pricing has to do with the usage model. Pricing has to do with how the client is accustomed to buying similar products or services in the past. So the pricing is not something for you to act allergic to. The pricing discussion is a learning element because the fastest way to a purchase order is if you have a product or service that is aligned with a line item that already exists in the corporate budget, number one. And then number two, if the pricing of that product or service is similar to other things that the client is used to buying. So one of the things that we did with our pricing is we had to get pricing for clients that have over 5,000 employees. Right? We're so excited. We've got an enterprise customer and they're going to pay us $200,000 for this, right? No, they're not. Right? But they may pay us $2 per employee per year, which then over 1,000 employees starts to move us to the number that we valued our tools, but the way we represented the pricing at many times was incorrect based on the way the buyer thought, their systems, their understanding. So again, when we look at feedback, we have to take ourselves out of the equation for a minute and understand the depth and the detail of where that feedback's coming from and what it's trying to teach us. That's the data interpretation. And that's something that as a business leader that I've worked on, that partnering, Kurt, with folks like yourself and the things that we've been able to do, we've really been able to hone in on that better. And even though we were representing smaller businesses, we learned how to do deals with multi-billion-dollar global enterprises because we started to listen to the feedback. Even if though in the beginning we didn't quite like it, we didn't understand it, we took that positive growth mindset view and then figured out how to make it work for us.
Right. So that idea of moving from data collection to data interpretation and then actioning on that data in the business is key. And there are things that as a product leader you think about maybe in a narrow way, where you're thinking about how does it meet my customers' needs in terms of technology and looking at competitors and other things like that. But broadening that understanding to things like how people buy is important. All kinds of other things that don't really have anything to do with the technology itself, but more about thinking about the value proposition for the solution. And so you touched a little bit on understanding the customer and their environment and what their concerns are from a day-to-day operational point of view. But wanted you to kind of dig into that a little bit more, just thinking about, whether it's procurement in the organization and how they function, or trying to stay under a certain dollar amount because of approvals and other things like that. So wanted you to go a little deeper on expanding the envelope in terms of some of the things that you should be considering.
So our goal here for this conversation is to talk to our audience about how to go from $0 to $1 million. It's hard to do that if a handful of your deals are stuck in procurement because you don't understand the buying process of your client and the decision-making authority of your champion. And so one of the things to go from $0 to $1 million that's really, really important is you have to really understand the horsepower of your champion. Right? Because if you get this wrong, you're going to think you've got a large opportunity when really you've had a large amount of discussions with a nice person. Right? And there's not as much money in that, right? And so how do you determine that champion and their ability to help guide you through an organization to get a deal done? You ask them. And now here's how I'm going to give you some specific questions and how to interpret those answers. Let's just say we're talking to Julie, and we're talking to Julie about buying whatever, and it's $50,000, right? Julie, basically, we've been talking about a set of solutions in the neighborhood of $50,000 to $70,000 in terms of the investment for you all. Is this a decision level, right, from a financial standpoint that you can take a loan? Or how does the communication process go once you decide you like something? Now, I'm going to use the positive answer and the negative, right? So sometimes Julie will think that this is an ego question. I'm the decider.
All right.
So don't laugh, okay? Because it's usually not true of something that's above $50,000 in any organization of any size that one person can decide, unless you're talking to the CEO. And even then, it's unlikely. And I'll cover that in a minute. So even if Julie says, no, I'm the decider, fantastic. Once you've decided, who else is in the approval process? Do you see how I shifted the words? Julie may have the authority as the decision maker because her unit is going to leverage the learning and development technology you're selling, the CRM technology if she's in sales operations, if she's in finance, the new instance of NetSuite or whatever, right? Once you've decided, Julie, what is that approval process to work within your systems, and how long does that typically take? And now all of a sudden, I need to get this paperwork over to procurement. My manager is going to need to sign this. And now all of a sudden, Julie is talking about the business process of buying something from an external vendor partner. You have to understand that early enough in the sales process before you can really forecast when a deal is going to close or not. One of the things I've found, and this is a cheat code, this is a fundamental, this is something to just get comfortable with. You want to sell at the highest level in the hierarchy possible. The higher the title of the individual, the busier they are, the more truthful they are, the more power they have. All these things are good. If you're talking to somebody that's insanely busy and they give you 30 minutes, that's a validator. If you talk to somebody lower level in the organization, they'll spend hours with you pretending it's work. Hours. And it'll feel like an amazing conversation. You think they're going to buy something, and no, they're not. They're just hanging out with you. They're not. But when you're talking to an executive vice president, when you're talking about a VP of product management, when you're talking to a VP of human resources, when you're talking to somebody that is an emerging executive or in the C-suite, I was talking to a CEO the other day, and I said, let me tell you about XYZ product. He said, Don, let's talk about that another time. Here's 2 things that I want to understand if your organization can do. This is my pain. I was like, okay. Right? And the CEO proceeded to tell me his pain. If you can solve these 2 things, send me information tomorrow. I'll look at it over the weekend and let's talk again next week, and I'll bring the right folks to the call. The leadership is so busy that they don't have time to toy with you. They're either into what you're pitching or not. And that's what you want as a business professional trying to go from 0 to $1 million fast, is people to tell you their truth. If they are interested, here's what our next steps are. If they're not, you get the opportunity to overcome those objections real time. If you don't, call the next person. But you're going to get that real time feedback, and whatever they commit to, they're going to be able to deliver against. Super important. So I try to sell as high as I can in the organization. When you're dealing with someone mid-level, I ask their permission. At what point in this conversation can we work on getting leadership buy-in? How does that work? They'll tell you. Well, I'm going to vet this. I'm going to pull this together with the team. But once we have this information, it'll be ready to go above once we agree XYZ. But most sales professionals, most entrepreneurs don't know how to qualify prospects. And that's really what I've been talking about for the last 10 minutes. How do you qualify the people that you're talking to make sure that you're not wasting their time and they're not wasting yours? I was on a call earlier today, and in addition to my work as CEO of the diversity movement, we are now a workplace options company. We're excited about being acquired by Alan King and his team, and the future is really, really bright. In addition to that work and role, I do a fair amount on boards, whether it's hospital systems, financial organizations, but I really love startups. And so I was talking with a startup leader earlier, and he said, Don, this is what I'm looking for in advisors. And I'm in a hurry because I want to get this set up and enter these new markets, XYZ. So I was like, okay, I like the pace of an entrepreneur. I said, but let me ask you a couple of questions, right, to make sure that we're aligned. I said, how do you take feedback? Give me some examples of how you give and receive feedback throughout your organization, with your investors, with your board. How do you do that? And the entrepreneur talked me through it, because qualification for sales, qualification if I would be a good board member or advisor, how am I going to work successfully? As many ideas, points of feedback as I have, if I'm talking to somebody who doesn't truly want feedback, right? They just want a name on their website, right? That describes, the quality of their business. So anyway, qualification of your prospects is one of the critical elements of going from 0 to $1 million, because there's so many of us in our forecasts that are chasing ghost deals, and you can't feed your family on ghost deals.
That's right. You might be able to feed your ego, but you're not.
Temporarily.
Temporarily, because you think everybody loves everything you have to say. Seeking out feedback that's a powerful insight, and that's one of the things that's, as you're describing this idea of finding your first client or find your first success. The quicker you hear no's, the faster you'll be able to move to that. And so how have your initial successes, getting your first client, getting positive feedback, how's that influenced both the confidence, because what you're talking about is challenging, having 100 customer interviews, talking to people who are going to constantly tell you no, having the fortitude to move through that. How do you use some successes as a way to chart the path forward and set the strategy for growth for the organizations that you've been involved in?
So one of the things in an organization, and especially as a leader in the organization, not the leader, but a leader, right? You know, you can be head of sales, you can be head of product. There's leadership throughout the organization. Is there has to be a belief system that's strong enough in the vision to weather the daily storms of discouragement. Because if you're chasing something big enough, right, it's not going to go from 0 to 1,000,000 with no drama, no pain, no disappointment. Right? It doesn't happen. It's not happening to me. It's not happening to anybody I know. It's not happening to anybody I've read about. But so, you know, if you have another use case, we'll leave that for another time. But you're going to have some obstacles to overcome as an individual and as a team. And so when you're having these conversations, you want to really think about them as learning opportunities every step of the way, and not as a personal indictment or validation of who you are and what you think. And a lot of times entrepreneurs and creatives and people that are amazing at what they do, but there is a very tight personal linkage between the work, the product, and the individual. And that's why it's very difficult to give critique to a creative, because no matter how you do it, you're attacking them personally because they've put their heart, their soul into that work, right? As an entrepreneur, you have got to create some detachment, right? And that detachment allows you to listen objectively, no matter where the information comes from. And so I think it's really important on that path from 0 to 1,000,000 to live in reality, not based on the best case version of your spreadsheet, right? Because all of us have gotten rich on our spreadsheets, right? 100 customers times $55,000 times blah, blah, blah. And yeah, right? Like, and we got it, right? And okay, right? That's good for planning and different things. But the reality of the day-to-day business is it's going to be a lot of ups and downs emotionally for you and your team. And so that means the vision of why you're doing it has to be strong enough to overcome that. For us, as we were building the diversity movement as a pure startup, right, from 0 to 1,000,000, just like I'm talking about here, our goal, right, was to create a better workplace for all across the globe. Our goal was for Black and brown professionals to have the same economic opportunities within companies as their counterparts. Our goal was to make sure that people of all different generations communicated together well so that work was more fun, more impactful, more valuable, not something people dreaded going to. Our goal was to talk to leaders across the globe because we know that leaders have a tremendous impact, not only on their business, but on the society that they work and live. And that high quality leaders that create a high quality business environment, right, give people the ability, right, to have better work-life integration. And when you have a great experience at work, it's going to help improve the experience outside of work. So for us as a team, the meaning behind the work we were doing was and is so significant that it allowed us to push through the murder of George Floyd that happened after we got started. It was pushing through a pandemic, right? Who starts a startup in a pandemic? We did, right? Like we did all kinds of things wrong, weird, and probably would do it different, right? If I had to do it over again. But we were learning every step of the way. But we were learning because what we were trying to do from a mission standpoint was so significant, right? In one of my earlier ventures in the computer-aided design space, the engineering software space, right? You know, I remember going on a jetway bridge, right, from the ticket counter, right, to the airplane, and then realizing that the software that our little company built, right, was used by Jetway to build those jetway bridges. That when our software was used by John Deere to help farmers, right, better cultivate their land, that we were a part of Feeding America. And so you have to, as a business leader, truly link, right, the vision of what you're doing and why it matters in a significant way, so that when you're pushing through the ups and downs of growing a business, scaling a business, launching a new product, whatever it is, right? Your team can stay focused because the mission is so powerful, so valuable.
Don, those are very powerful insights from getting started. And many people say the road from 0 to 1 is the hardest part of growing any venture. And so once you're able to overcome that, then things don't necessarily get easy, but certainly you've gotten the most difficult thing out of the way in terms of validating the business. And so thank you for sharing that today. The things that you've shared are designed to hopefully spark some insight and give folks the practical steps that they need to make sure that they have the right mindset to move forward. So thank you so much for having me today, and looking forward to seeing all of what is going to happen next as you move forward.
Well, I appreciate it, Kurt, as always. And you always pull out the best in whatever subject we're talking about. And the final thing I would say is, Peter Thiel, I think this is the quote you're alluding to, the former CEO of PayPal, talked about going from 0 to 1 million being harder, right, than going from 10 million to 100 million.
Right.
And so for those business leaders that are out there, we're cheering for you, right? Because when you get that first million under your belt, you're a badass. And you are absolutely going to take the learning, take the opportunity, take the potential for growth, and it gives you a chance for that $100 million dream. But you can't get to $1 billion, you can't get to 100 million, you can't get to 10 million without getting to $1 million. And that's the goal that we want people to take away. Kurt, thanks for your help.
Thanks so much.
Over and out. Thank you for joining us on High Octane Leadership with Donald Thompson. Today's episode is a step in our collective journey towards leadership excellence. Remember, every story we share and every insight we gain is a piece in the puzzle of our leadership journey. For more insight and detail, hit the subscribe button so that we can stay connected. For deeper information and more episodes, go to donaldthompson.com. Continue to lead with vision and purpose, and until we meet again, embrace your role as a high-octane leader in the ever-evolving world of business.